Hi, I'm Lizzie Kurtzer, your inner connection coach, and I'm passionate about connection, belonging, talking about shame and the menstrual cycle. And today I really want to talk about shame. Um, it's not going to be the most perfect video, and I'm not going to cover everything about shame, but I really wanted to open up that conversation and share a little bit about my experience and share a little bit about some of the things that have helped me. I've just kind of come off of a shamey week, a week that I would call like a bit of a shame bomb, or I've been in a bit of a shame hole. And yeah, my mind just kind of wants to share this before I go there. One of the things that I'm also in my mind that I've been like writing a newsletter for my community is around being the best thing in your life. Like, you are the best thing in your life. And it might not feel like that right now, but that's, the goal. And that's when I'm working with people where we want to get to like you being the best thing in your life, because it's from that place and that connection and that relationship that everything else kind of permeates and like unfolds from. But so often, what's stopping us from being the best thing in our life and having this like wonderful, deep connection and relationship with us is shame. And, and then, well, where do we go from there? Like this topic and these layers of shame. Like, what is shame? So Brene Brown she defines shame as the intensely painful feeling or belief that you are flawed and therefore unworthy of connection, belonging, and shame. And like shame for me is those feelings of wrongness. Like guilt is I did something wrong. I feel guilty, I did something wrong. Shame is I am wrong. And it is like those feelings like, yeah, I am wrong. My existence is wrong. It's dark. It's uncomfortable. It's all the wrongness, ugliness, messiness. Like I am not enough. The not enoughness and like the deep unworthiness, like the deep sense of unworthiness that comes from this wrongness. And where does shame come from? Like shame comes from like different things, right? It might be a familial thing. It's the world that we live in, patriarchy, capitalism, religion. I grew up in a Catholic family. We weren't super Catholic at all, but I think Catholicism's language is shame. And so there's different reasons, like things that where shame kind of comes from. And the thing about shame is that like, if I use diet culture, for example, because it's what impacts so many women, so many clients, it was part of my journey, is that diet culture wants you to think that the shame that you have is about your body, but it's not your body that's generating the shame, it's diet culture, right? Patriarchy wants you to think that, the shame that's around your needs and being too much and being too big and being too needy, that's the shame, versus the shame comes from that patriarchal belief that a good woman is a woman with no needs. So, when you go on this journey of exploring shame, it's kind of separating out like you from the shame as to like where the shame comes from and like whose shame is this. But, shame it's horrible. It feels horrible and it isolates us and it's lonely and you feel like you're the only one. And if that's, if some people kind of recognize like, yeah, it's shame, and some people don't really recognize that that's what their experience is, but that's how I can describe it for me, which was that feeling of wrongness and my existence being wrong. Like I shouldn't be here. And it wasn't like a suicidal ideation. It wasn't that at all. But what it was is just like, I shouldn't exist. And whenever I would do something new, try something different, think about my goals, like just step into a space and be too much, whatever that was, like show myself, reveal myself, I would just end up in a shame bomb and all of those feelings of wrongness and not enoughness. And yeah, just I don't know how to describe, like I don't know what other word is for that wrongness. And then part of that was that deep unworthiness. Like, who am I to do X? Who am I to want X? like, who am I to exist was really at the core of it. And that's horrible. It's dark. It's painful. And that's sort of how I used to walk through life. You know, when I went to therapy, it kind of was this thing that took a while to come out, but one, this recognition of like just this deep sense of worthlessness, and then through that learning about shame and just feeling like, and recognizing that shame was the lens that I saw myself and moved through life. And part of therapy was like separating and learning how to recognize it and move away from it. And I'm not going to go into all of that today because there's so many avenues that we could go through this. But, you know, now shame is different, like how it comes into my life, because it's never about getting rid of shame. And some people might disagree with me on that, but, you know, shame is kind of there, but I am not shame. You know, before it was just like I was shame, full stop. It wasn't that I experienced shame. I was shame. That's how I described it. Whereas now it's like there is a part of me, if we talk about like parts of ourselves, shame is a part of me. It can sometimes kind of rise to the surface, and sometimes it's like a little bit of that mindfulness practice of like, oh, I've noticed shame, you know, how do I need to meet that? What do I need to give to myself? And then it kind of, I move through it and it kind of goes away. And I do have a bit of a practice of checking in with my shame and like to manage that part of myself. But I really don't experience the shame bombs or like the shame holes or walking through just like being shame. And nor do I have that sense of worthlessness. You know, these days it's like I'm worthy, full stop. Like, and that is this wonderful experience that I have, this like wholeness and this completeness and then this deep love and this deep worthiness. But about a week ago, I've been trying out some new things to support myself and my business, and I'm sure it was a combination of multiple things, but there was an experience of miscommunication between me and quite a few people. But there was one experience with my friend, miscommunication. I kind of did something that was different and unusual for me, and then part of that miscommunication left me feeling like just horrified and in shame. So rather than feeling like, oh, okay, perhaps I would have done that differently, that felt a bit silly, I just kind of went into this immediate space of shame, and I knew that's where I was heading. And I normally, the things that I would do to recognize it, and it would kind of I would move through it quite quickly. For the first time in a really long time, I was in that space for about a week, and it was really tough and different, because I guess when you're in shame, and where I used to experience shame, you have the shame that you're experiencing, and then you have the shame about the shame. And I don't know, some people might be like, what on earth are you talking about? And then I imagine if you are someone who kind of is aware of this, might be nodding their heads and saying, yeah, I get that. Like the shame that you have about shame, and then all the behaviors that you engage in to try and like soothe yourself from that shame. You then have shame about those behaviors. And so I guess this week I was reminded of, one, how isolating and lonely it can feel. And, you know, when it first happened, I shared with Beth, that is one of the first things I'd always say to people is like sharing, like, can you share with people about your shame? Because you want to bring it out of the light. Like shame really breeds in the dark. You know, and so I said to Beth, this thing happened, I feel really shamey about it. And yeah, like, can you listen to me? And, you know, Bethany and I were both like, yeah, it's just one of those miscommunications that, you know, Beth was like, that's really not that big of a deal. I can see it is for you, but, you know, just so you know, it really wasn't that big of a deal. But I think where I was in my cycle, I was just about to get my bleed. We were really busy over those days. I didn't get to rest like I normally would on my period. When I'm really, really busy and go, doing, I find it really hard to like stay connected to myself. And so there was just this combination of coming up to my bleed and then being on my bleed, being really busy, already having just like uncomfortable feelings around shame that kind of just meant it maybe went on longer than it normally would. And so I was reminded, as I said, like how painful it is, how lonely it is. And those feelings like you're the only one that's going through this. And from that, I kind of wanted to share some of the things that have helped me on my journey of healing shame, and then helped me move through or move out of shame. Because one of the things that shame does is it leads us to think or maybe forget our humanness, because of our shame and our wrongness, and who am I to exist. We forget that we're allowed to have needs, right? We forget that we're a human being with needs. We forget that we're allowed to feel joy. We forget that we're allowed to feel angry. We forget that we're allowed to feel embarrassed, or that we're allowed to make mistakes. We forget that we need rest. Like, all of these things become shame triggers. And it's like, who am I to make a mistake? Who am I to ask for help? Who am I to have needs and be physically hungry and then eat and really enjoy that and feel satisfied? Like, I'm not allowed to do that because I'm wrong. Like, other people can do that, but I'm not, because my needs are wrong. This is how like shame shows up. And I just kind of was reminded that, and over the weekend, as I was trying to move through this, knowing that these days I really don't have the shame about the shame. I can kind of sit there and be with the shame and watch the shame and have the compassion for myself and soothe in the ways that once upon a time I would have had shame about, right? Like self-soothing with food once upon a time was one of the things that then I would have had a lot of shame about, and then it would lead into these big sort of binging cycles, versus now I can recognize, like, I'm feeling shame and right now I'm going to self-soothe with food, or I'm feeling shamey and right now I'm going to hop into bed. I don't feel ashamed about those things. So over the weekend, amongst the busyness, kind of trying to maneuver with it and like trying to find different ways to meet myself. And I just had this moment on Monday. I was getting in the bath and recognizing a part of me that was really struggling with it. And I suddenly was like back in contact with this part of me that was like, you have permission to be. Like, you have permission to feel sad. You have permission to struggle. You have permission to have needs. You have permission to like eat. I'm not going to go into it now, but sometimes that's a bit of the sticky dynamic that can come back in for me, like the memory that I used to have with food and not feeling like that whole restrictive, not allowed to have any needs, not allowed to enjoy my food, not allowed to eat, coming back in there. And suddenly I remembered, my humanness. And some people might be thinking, well, I don't need permission for any of those things, and wonderful. And yes, I've gotten to a place where I would say most of the time I don't need permission to be a human. I just know I am, and my needs exist, and my vulnerabilities exist, and my humanness exists, and my feelings and emotions, they come and they go, and I move with them very beautifully these days with a lot of grace and compassion. But this weekend I forgot that because I was in a bit of a shame hole. And then suddenly I remembered this, and I just remember hearing this voice, just like, you have permission. You have permission for all of those things. And just the sense of like relief and the space that brought in for me was huge. So can you access, if you are someone who knows that you really suffer with shame, can you access a voice or a part of you that is permission giving and that gives you permission to remember your humanness and be human? That might feel really hard, and I don't know if that's something that I would have been able to do early on. And so it depends where you are in your journey with it. And if I'm to go back, a lot of steps and a lot of years, one of the first things I would recommend if you were on a journey with shame is befriending your shame and like really getting to know your shame. I can remember early on like making this commitment, like the way I envisioned it was like I was going to move closer to my shame and pick up its hand and walk through life holding its hand. And that's kind of my thing now. For those who work with their different parts, my inner child really, and shame, like my inner child is really good at like approaching and holding my shame's hand, and it's a really beautiful relationship that these two parts of myself have. But they took a really long time. And so befriending your shame, getting to know your shame, because that's where you kind of can create a bit of that space. And one, start to remove the shame about the shame, because that is like a journey in itself, like removing the shame about the shame. But yeah, to get to a place where shame is no longer like your pure existence and how you live through your life and like your point of reference. Like shame was my point of reference. And there were times where I really didn't believe I would ever move beyond that. It dominated my life. And if that's where you are now, I want you to know that you can and you will move through it. And there will come a point where your shame, you will befriend your shame. And this might sound strange, but your shame will feel safe, and you'll be able to care for your shame and give your shame the love and the care and the compassion and the space and the light that it needs, so that you can live your life from a place of worthiness, infinite belonging, connection, and fullness and wholeness. Yeah, I don't know if that is helpful for people. There's so much I could share about shame. I think the last thing actually I'll say is also there's a lot for me linked with anger and shame, and or recognizing the feeling that I'm trying to suppress when I'm in shame. Because one of the things that shame does is, because it's so horrific to feel, it's where I will often start to dissociate and disconnect from my body. And this is where we bring in a lot of the embodiment work and the connection and the reconnecting with our body. One, so that we can recognize like where the feelings are taking up space and like where the shame's taking up space. But also like what is underneath the shame? What needs to be felt? What needs to be heard? And like this past weekend, again, I was reminded of that. Like I had this little crack of space that came in where I kind of gave myself permission, like permission to feel, permission to struggle, permission to make mistakes, like permission to eat, permission to be a human. And then through that, it was like, then I could feel it again, this resistance, because there was it was almost like an invitation then to move closer to my shame and then closer to what was underneath the shame. But there was a part of me that didn't want to do that, because sometimes it feels like those feelings, they're so dark and heavy. Like, you know, like who wants to feel that? Like who wants to feel that? And it felt like it can feel bottomless, and it can feel like it will just, I will implode and my world will implode. And one of the ways that I've really learnt to be able to get in there and like move through it is through dance. And I'm a big lover of 5 rhythms. And I have been meaning to join a 5 rhythms. I do it online at home, but I've been meaning to join a class since moving to Edinburgh. We've been in Edinburgh nearly 2 years now. And there was a class on Tuesday evening. And so Percy just comes to sit in my lap, the cat. So I went to 5 rhythms, and it's an hour and a half. Anyone who's been an hour and a half of moving your body intuitively through with the rhythms, with the music, and I was able to sit with those different parts of myself and let it move through me. And so it's almost like today, like I'm not having to sit there and like what's the right word, like mentally go through it all. I've just, through dance, I've been able to move through. I was going to say push the emotions out. That's not a very nice way of putting it, but I've been able to move through with my body and move some of that darkness and that stickiness and that grief and that anger for me that feels like that I will implode if I allow myself to go near it. It allowed me to kind of like unstick it. Is that the right way of putting it? So movement. That is hard though, I recognise, when a lot of the self-soothing behaviours that people engage in is to avoid the feelings of shame and then everything that's underneath that shame, because again, it feels horrible. Who'd want to feel that? And that is a lot of the work that I do with my clients, very gently, with so much grace and compassion, is like moving closer to themselves, moving closer to their bodies, moving closer to their shame, so that we can kind of help them meet it and then be able to move forward. Right, I will leave it there. Let me know in the comments, like please share if any of your takeaways from today, anything that's helped you on your journey of meeting your shame and moving through shame. Equally, if you don't want to share in the comments but you want to have a chat with me, you know, always email me or reach out to me on Instagram and other social media. And if you haven't already, like and subscribe. And if there's someone in your life you think maybe needs to hear this, please share it with them. Thanks. Bye.